The Torah is unequivocally the most important and the most valuable book ever written since the creation of the world. And it was written as a guide for the most important people of the world, the 12 tribes of Israel. And according to Jeremiah 31, verse 36, his covenant children will never cease to be a nation before the eyes of our Creator. Father wanted to instruct all his covenant children on how we were to worship our Creator and treat one another, because we are the apple of his eye. The Torah claims to contain the very instructions for our life as to how to please, worship, and remain in covenant with the Almighty. The command was to honor him by keeping his words before our eyes continually, and to read them daily, and to teach them to our children from generation to generation. It is said that there is not an idle word, not a jot or tittle that is not of profound significance, or that should ever be removed from the Torah. It is said by the Apostle John that the Torah actually became flesh in the human body of Yeshua and tabernacled with us in an effort to teach us by example how to obey his teachings and instructions for life, written in the Torah. Therefore the Torah is, as Paul said, perfect and holy, and consequently our guide to what is truth. The Torah points to Yeshua, and Yeshua points to the Torah. Now, concerning the Aleph and the Tav, when I sat down at my computer over 4 years ago, in February of 2009, to begin to put together what is known today as the Messianic Aleph Tav Scriptures, or the acronym MATS, as a study Bible, I did so with a completely open mind, as I wanted to sincerely try to acquire as much facts as possible, whereby I could honestly try to figure out what, if anything, was the significance of this character symbol that John called the Aleph and the Tav, and if it truly had any relationship or connection to Yeshua, the Messiah, that could be validated. And I knew that in order for myself or anyone to be able to properly investigate the evidence, it would require a paper-printed version of the entire Old Testament Tanakh, which had the Aleph Tavs placed exactly between the same two English words as it appears in the Hebrew text. Now I remember when it came to my attention from an individual that the Aleph Tav was simply a direct object pointer in Hebrew grammar, and absolutely nothing more. I was already deep into my study of the Aleph Tav, so the obvious question that immediately popped into my mind was, if that is all it is, then why isn't the Aleph Tav used in every verse in the entire Old Testament Tanakh that has a direct object? This was a very logical and fair question to ask. I mean, what rules could Moses and the prophets have been applying as to when and where to place the Aleph Tav and when to leave it out, if all it was a direct object pointer in Paleo-Hebrew grammar? Because there is obvious disparity. For when you examine statistically how many verses there are in the Old Testament Tanakh in relationship to how many verses there are that contain the Aleph Tav, the answer is approximately 26%. Granted, there isn't a book in the Tanakh without the Aleph Tavs, some more than others. But so why is it absent from nearly 75% of the verses in the Tanakh? And why are there whole chapters with no Aleph Tavs? This evidence alone clearly points to the fact that whether or not the Aleph Tavs are placed in a verse logically has something to do with the subject matter discussed in the verse. I further noticed that when the transient or action verb in a verse answered the question who or what, and the Aleph Tav was actually pointing out the direct object noun or pronoun in a verse, the reason the Aleph Tav was placed there was because it just so happened that the direct object in the verse was actually related to the Yahed, and that was where, apparently, the Aleph Tav needed to be placed, because of subject matter, and not because of grammar. Proof of this is witnessing hundreds of times the Aleph Tav points out adjectives, adverbs, and even prepositions. This fact alone destroys the direct object pointer theory. Another question that is logical to ask, since we're talking about the most important book ever written in all humanity, what would be the purpose and significance of placing the Aleph Tav as only a Paleo-Hebrew grammar mark? Further research has shown me that apparently, even among the Jewish rabbis, not surprisingly, there is disagreement over the purpose and meaning of the Aleph Tav. I was very pleasantly surprised after I asked a well-known rabbi in Israel, known for his website, Ask the Rabbi, what he thought the Aleph Tav character symbol meant. He sent me a quote from Rabbi S.R. Hirsch, who lived back in the late 1800s and is considered not only a Jewish scholar, but his teachings are still considered relevant for Orthodox Judaism to this very day. Hirsch stated, in fact, the sages do deduce laws from the places where the Aleph Tav appears. The rule is that it is meant to include something above and beyond the limited definition of the word. Rabbi S.R. Hirsch explains that it is related to the word os, or sign, i.e., the thing stands for something more than itself. There have been other very famous Jewish rabbis down through history that also believe the Aleph Tav was a symbol of the divine, like Rabbi Nahum of Gimzu and two of his pupil rabbis, Simeon and Rabbi Akiva, that lived during the 1st century, that did extensive research on the Aleph Tav and believed strongly that it was not a word, but a mark that was a sign of, or invitation to, amplification. And according to their Talmud, wherever there is room for amplification, there is an invitation to see the sign of a divine invitation for some other secret or unwritten meaning. Rabbi Nahum attempted to explain every occurrence of the Aleph Tav in the Torah, and Akiva built on his work, suggesting that every occurrence of the Aleph Tav is meant to indicate the presence of the divine hand. Rabbi Simeon refrained from expanding or expounding on the Aleph Tav because in the command to have awe for Elohim, yet Akiva suggests that amplification is indeed possible, since the Aleph Tav directly defines Elohim. Akiva's idea is that the Aleph Tav is the secret sign of Elohim, the silent sefer, or secret code that embraces all the other words of the Torah, and indeed of all creation. Born in 50 A.D. and died in 135 A.D., these words coming from Rabbi Akiva are not to be taken lightly, for Akiva is one of the greatest figures in Jewish history, a person whose influence and statue is a source of inspiration throughout all the ages. Whatever one says about Rabbi Akiva, one can never say enough. The Talmud compares him favorably to Moses, which is the ultimate compliment in the Jewish lexicon. He is the national hero of the Jewish people for all time. And I totally agree with all these Jewish teachers' opinions on the Aleph Tav, being what I would describe as a direct object pointer to the divine. And the reason I do is because in my own personal studies, I have found that the majority of the places where the Aleph Tav appears, it seems to be in relationship to when the subject matter is in regard to the Yahed accomplishing something, whether it's concerning creation or covenants or atonement or judgments or blessings. The Aleph Tav appears also in places dealing with events of the Yahed in relationship concerning people, persons, places, and things, such as temple objects. This is amazing, and I think all Jewish teachers saw this as well, and probably a whole lot more. Let me show you just one verse and expose some inconsistencies in the translation. In Genesis 15, verse 18, in that same day made Yahuwah, Aleph Tav, Abram, a covenant, saying. The verb in this verse is made, and Abram is either the possessive adjective describing the covenant, or if you want to believe that the Aleph Tav actually represents a preposition, then Abram would be the object of the preposition. But in either case, the direct object is a covenant, not Abraham, because it answers the question, what was made? To make matters more bewildering, this particular Aleph Tav in this verse, with these vowel points, is sometimes erroneously translated into the English as the preposition with. But we have to remember that originally in Paleo-Hebrew, the Aleph Tav for thousands of years had no vowel points. And if the word with existed at all in Paleo-Hebrew, Moses would have placed it there. But it can be argued that prepositions did not come along in Hebrew until the 8th and 10th century A.D., when the Masoretes began to use vowel points. So to presume that Moses was actually placing the Aleph Tav in this verse to be interpreted as the preposition with is very presumptuous. And for the early translators to occasionally translate some Aleph Tavs as the preposition with, and then leave the vast majority of thousands of Aleph Tavs untranslated and ignored with the same vowel points, is clearly a double standard and adds insult to injury, and shows further proof that the early English translators truly didn't know what to do with this character symbol. I personally would reason that Moses most likely placed the Aleph Tav before Abram as a mark symbolizing the divine hand and the strength of the covenant being made with Abram, and to show the importance and relevance of this divine covenant. And yet today we can add to this reasoning whereby we know that Yeshua is incorporated as the Aleph and the Tav, and that all covenants are through him that were made. And he is also the mediator of all the covenants. And we would further reason that this is the Yahed, the Father and the Son, working together as one, making this covenant with Abram, as symbolized also with the two distinct symbolisms mentioned in verse 17 as the furnace smoking and the lamp burning that passed over the sacrifices. Now here is the Aleph Tav pointing not to the direct object in the verse, but one of hundreds of times when it is pointing to the adjective in Genesis 2:11, and again in Genesis 2:13, and the list goes on and on. Actually, the Aleph Tav appears before this Hebrew word, kale, hundreds of times, and is translated into English, into various adjectives and pronouns. In closing, I would like for you to look at this verse in Exodus 20:18, which states, "And all the people saw Aleph Tav's thunderings, Aleph Tav's lightnings, Aleph Tav's noise of the trumpet, Aleph Tav's mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they moved and stood afar off." And now let's read the same account in Deuteronomy 5, verse 24, which states, "Behold, hath shown us Yeshua, our Elohim, Aleph Tav, his glory, Aleph Tav, his greatness, Aleph Tav, voice of him we have heard out of the midst of the fire." Now let me ask you, who do you think is speaking? Well, the next verse gives us insight. In Deuteronomy 5:25, which states, "Now therefore, why should we die? For will consume us this great fire, if we hear Aleph Tav voice of Yeshua, our Elohim, any more." It's confirmed again in Deuteronomy 5, verse 28, which states, "And heard Yeshua, Aleph Tav, voice of your words, when ye spake." Folks, this is the Yahed, and to Moses, this symbol probably represented a connection to the strength of the covenant being made. But today, we have the additional understanding of what the Apostle John proclaimed about the Aleph and the Tav, that it incorporates and represents Yeshua, and that everything is an extension of him. I, too, have a theory about the Aleph Tav and how it was urbanized as nothing more than a direct object pointer in Paleo-Hebrew grammar. From the evidence we have known that originally it was widely taught and believed by prominent Jewish rabbis and sages for thousands of years that the Aleph Tav was very significant because it placed emphasis in the living word of the divine presence or divine hand and directly defined Elohim. And at some point, I believe, when certain powers to be heard of John's revelation, which elevated Yeshua to divinity and consequently connected him to the Aleph and the Tav, this enraged certain teachers and the powers to be within Judaism that rejected Yeshua as both divine or as Messiah. And they conspired to downplay the Aleph Tav as simply a direct object pointer in regard to Hebrew grammar and nothing more. To cover up from the Gentiles and the Messianic Jews any suggestion to the contrary. You may laugh at my theory, but it makes perfect sense because this is what many believe happened concerning the pronunciation of Father's memorial name. In an effort to keep the Gentiles from blaspheming, it was replaced with the word Lord and God in our English Bibles. So the bottom line, because of all the overwhelming evidence, I have no problem believing the Aleph Tav is a direct object pointer, but not in the sense of Paleo-Hebrew grammar, but in the sense of connecting or pointing to the object in the verse that relates to the working of the amplification of the divine hand of the Yahed. And it makes no difference whether it's pointing to a noun pronoun, adjective, adverb, or preposition, because grammar is not what is at stake here. So to answer the question, does the Aleph Tav include or incorporate Yeshua? Well, if Yeshua is divine, and I believe he is, then at the very least, the Aleph Tav has to incorporate him. And at the very most, it is his mark, revealing his presence as part of the Yahed and the protocol of how Father works, both with and through Yeshua. But let me put it this way. If the world was not created through Yeshua in the beginning, as John proclaims, and if he was not also there when the covenant with Abram was made, as confirmed by Yeshua, with the Yahed, symbolized in the two separate objects as the smoking furnace and the burning lamp that passes over the sacrifices. And if Yeshua was not there dealing with Moses at Mount Sinai face to face, then all believers in Yeshua as Messiah are in idolatry. Yeshua is either part of the Yahed or not. And if the Aleph Tav is a symbol of the divine hand and the strength of the covenant, then make no mistake, it has to incorporate Yeshua because of his deity, as John further proclaimed. And any other theory to the contrary is an agenda to discredit his divine deity. I'm Bill Sanford, trying to put the Aleph Tav in proper perspective in our day. Shalom.